My friends and fellow animal lovers, welcome to a new episode of the Story of My Pet podcast. I am very happy to welcome my guest, Amy King. Amy, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Recently, we bonded over our shared love of our pets. Amy, before we get into all the things, like I always say, I like to start off with, have you always been an animal lover and did you have pets growing up?
Yes, I've always been an animal lover. I didn't get pets until I was 10 or something like that. We wore my mom down and finally she let us get fish because my dad was allergic to cats and I'm allergic to dogs, even though I have dogs. But I just grew up with really bad eczema and she was just very weird about that. You know what I mean? So we had a tank of goldfish and we had a tank of tropical. And that was really very interesting because we got to see our black mollies give birth a couple of times and our scissorfish. It was
That's
very
cool.
fascinating. Yeah, it was really cool.
You know, I was just talking to a potential guest for this podcast, and she has a dog daycare and does behavioral things. And we were venting about what people do and don't do with their pets. And one of the things I said is what I've learned through all of this is a lot of what my experience has been. I think I sometimes assume other people have had it too, right? So I think with animals, sometimes we realize, oh, well, if you hadn't had a pet like this before, you don't know how they behave or how they should and all of that. So I love that you're talking about these fish and that the experience you guys got to have was seeing births and seeing them grow up. So it sounds like you wore your mom down and got to, you know, experience some fun things as a kid because of your fish.
Yeah, yeah. It wasn't a puppy or a kitty, but still it was cool in its own way because then it became like a family thing because we would go to the fish store and we would learn about all the different fish and it did turn into this giant project.
Once you get one, it turns into the whole thing.
I know. I think my mom was sorry I'd given in on that. But yeah, we had tanks for quite a few years. And then she said no more. So that was the end of it.
So then at what point did you decide to get a dog or to get your first pet?
Oh, now that's an interesting story. So my husband and I were dating and he got a job down in Arizona. It was training and it was supposed to be a 5-year gig. And so our first year we moved down together and our first year we lived in an apartment. And when we moved into our house, somebody I worked with kept telling me stories about this dog that she had gotten from her sister. And this dog, she presented as a Belgian Malinois, but she had like a little bit of Kita, it looked like in her. She was small, 45-pound dog, terrified. She had been to 4 homes by the time she was a year old, and we were the 4th. And
Doesn't help with their anxiety being moved around that much.
no. And I think that was harder for this dog is that the sister had adopted it from the pound and thought that it would make a great dog for her husband, who was a police officer at the time. So he trained that dog because he worked canine and he worked undercover. He trained this dog in very strict police ways. And because she had been abused, it didn't work out so well. I ended up with the dog because the dog was going to go to the pound. And I was like, wait a minute. Don't you take the dog? I kind of had fallen in love with this dog. And for a first time dog owner, that was just not really the dog I should have been bringing home. But fortunately, my husband had grown up with golden retrievers. So I convinced him to go look at this dog. Come on, please go look at this dog. She's going to go back to the pound. Sad story, tears. We go out. The next thing you know, we're driving home with this dog. And so that's our first dog. And she was terrified of everything. And she warmed up to us, but she was super, super afraid. She loved my husband, but she was super afraid of any other man. And very specific kind of things, like if you wore tank tops, if you had a stick, and if you were older, like she wouldn't go near a person that hit those kind of criteria. So that was our first dog. And we had a pair of rescues after her and then another pair of rescues after them. And One just recently passed, but we still have one of the pair.
I love that story because I have met so many people who have adopted the first time and ended up with an animal with some type of behavior issue. Either they put in the work and it works out and you do whatever you need for the animal, or they're like, oh, this is too much work. I can't do it. And that's a
Yeah.
lot of what ends up in the shelter, right? Dogs and cats that need a little extra. Now, I want everyone to realize all animals need that. No animal is going to be brought into a brand new environment, new people, new animals, and be like, sure, let's have fun. Like we wouldn't do that as humans, right? So we can't expect animals to. But I applaud you and your husband putting in the work and allowing a dog who obviously has just general anxiety around things be happy and live in a safe and positive environment, because not all dogs get to have that safe place.
Yeah, she was, thank you. I loved her. She was just such a sweet, expressive dog, but she had a lot of issues. She was a door dasher. So we never broke her at that. The minute the door opened, I got very good with the arms and legs, the door.
Yeah, I had a dog growing up that if the gardeners didn't lock the gate, she was off on a little adventure.
Yeah, and it's terrifying. And then the last thing about this dog is that because she had been an outdoor dog before we got her, she was an indoor dog with us. In Arizona, you can get valley fever. I don't know if you get that in California. So it's like mold spores that grow in the dirt and then it goes into your respiratory system. Well, because this dog was so dramatic, she was just a very dramatic dog. Took her into the vet for something else. And then the vet asked me some questions and what else is going on with her. And I said, she's been limping. And she's kind of a dramatic dog, but she was kind of holding her paw, looking at me. And I said, I don't know if this is her being dramatic. He goes, let's just take x-rays in case. And she had valley fever and it had gone into her,
Her bone.
yeah. And ended up having seizures because it went into her central nervous system. And so she was on a lot of medications. And that's what finally killed her, was all the medications that she was on. And one day she just laid down and didn't get back up and we had to take her in. But I think you have to be prepared for that. You know what I mean? And what's
Right.
your game plan? And,
Right. Yeah, so much of what you said is important, especially if it's someone's first pet or adding a pet. Like, you have to think about the time they need, the space, and how to introduce pets, all those things, plus the medical side. You never know what
yeah.
could come up. And one of my childhood dogs, Champ, he had seizures. When it first happened, we didn't know what was happening. And so he was on medication for his seizures for probably a decade of his life, right?
Yeah.
And so in the end, it was the medication caused other problems that ended up he had to be put to sleep. But, you never know. And that can look different for different animals. But the valley fever thing is really interesting because I never thought about the animals can get it. It actually is very
Mhm.
prevalent where I live in Bakersfield in California. There was actually some of the doctors here that did some of the early research with it because there's so much of it in our
Oh,
soil. I'm third generation on my mom's side, born and raised here. So we've been here for a while. And so she grew up here and she had no idea that at some point when she was a child, she had valley fever. She was sick at different
oh,
times, but it was never diagnosed back in the 50s and 60s. But when she was an adult living in Santa Barbara, she had several incidents where she couldn't breathe and her lung had collapsed. And it was after the second or third time, then they did tests, they realized she had all these scars from valley fever, and she actually had to have part of her lung taken out because it
oh,
would just
wow.
keep doing that if she hadn't. And so, those are things like that. I never even thought that a pet could get it. So that was just a very interesting, you bringing that. I'm like, wow, I would have never even
Yeah.
thought of that.
Mhm.
So you
Yeah.
mentioned you recently lost a dog. And so I don't know how
Mhm.
much you want to talk about that. But I know that one of the things I have found in this podcast is talking about our pets, especially the ones we've lost. Sometimes it's, healing to get to share them and talk about them. And it's also important for other pet parents to hear that it's okay if you're not okay. It's okay if you're struggling with an older pet or a pet that's sick, or you've lost a pet and you're not ready to get a new one. Those are important things for us to talk about and be like, it's okay. It's up to you what feels right to you. I'm sure it's a little different for you because you had a pair and you still have one. But we also have to think about the pet that's left behind. Sometimes it can really affect them. How has
Yeah.
that whole transition period of losing a pet been for you?
I think the loss of this pet was extra hard on me. And because, our first dog was the extra medication. And then the next two dogs, one had to have a splenectomy. It's never easy over here. So he had to have a splenectomy. And then after, because he had a slow bleed in his spleen. And I said to my husband, he looks depressed. You look at him, he looks depressed. He doesn't look quite right. And he's like, he's a dog. He's not depressed. And I'm like, so I took him to the vet and then they did some tests and he had this slow bleed in his spleen. So I guess two things. I think being really observant and in tune with your dog can save your dog's life, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is, like you said, so then the next one had stomach cancer. So it was kind of these things that happened.
Right.
And then we kind of knew that they had this limited time. With Flanders, he had LARPAR. So he had to have a laryngeal tie back so that he could breathe because he was starting to sound like Darth Vader.
You
We're
guys get
talking
all the
thousands of
crazy things.
Yeah. And so
But maybe the
we
universe knows that you guys will really take care of them, even if it's something crazy. Because, I hear all the time animals get taken to shelters because they can't afford medical care and things like that. So somebody knows that you guys will go the extra mile for your dogs.
Gosh, well, the family, and you wouldn't let a family member suffer, but then also at some certain point, you've got to say, this is too much. We weren't sure how long he was going to last, but you know what? 2 years, that gave him two extra very good years, except for a few bouts of pneumonia because they can aspirate. So you have to be very careful about drinking and feeding. And in the early post surgery, I grieved multiple times because he'd lay on the floor and I thought he was going. I'm like, this is it. He's dying. And because he really did look like he was dying. And so it was a long kind of 2 years. I enjoyed every minute that we could with him. But then he started to slow down because he was 14 by the time, we had to put him down. The trauma of, we have a vet that we've been going to for over 20 years. Not the vet that owned the practice had sold it to like a corporate model, but that the vet that we had there had been caring for all our pets. So they care, she cared for Buddy and Trigger and Flanders and again. And I think the hardest part is when we called to say we were having this problem and that because of their business model, they weren't going to take him in. They just said, go to the emergency room. And that was heartbreaking for me because this dog really hated the emergency room because we'd been there for, you know what I mean? And so we kind of went the rounds of trying to find a place to, take him that would feel like the right place to take him. We ended up at another corporate model kind of emergency clinic that was way better than the other ones that we had been going to. And it was a very lovely, peaceful passing and they were great. But I think that I just felt so let down by our long-term vet and it wasn't her, you know what I mean?
Right.
Even when you try to get in, it's like a week out for.
And that is, one of the big issues in the US. On top of the overpopulation crisis and how many animals we have with not enough homes, there aren't enough vets. There aren't enough vets that can take new clients. I've even read there aren't enough vets in school becoming vets. Like we don't even have enough in the pipeline. I've had people tell me here locally where I live that they've called around and can't even find a vet to take in a new patient. Like you said, with emergency vets, they're so overrun. They'll say, sure, come, but you're going to have to wait in the parking lot for 8 hours. The system doesn't make it easy for those of us who are trying to help. And so that kind of makes it even more difficult for new people to adopt too, when they don't have good resources to support them and their pets.
Yeah. I mean, gone are the days that you say, oh my gosh, my dog injured his foot and can't walk. And then they say, okay, we can squeeze him in at this time. Can you come?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So because everything's so spaced out, they don't want anyone together.
I think that's part of the difficulty, but then also for us emotionally is the roller coaster of not knowing, or is this the right time? What do they need? They can't
Mhm.
tell us. And even when we're really
No,
in tune and we can tell something's wrong, we can't always figure out what it is. And that's so hard. And what I have learned is sometimes the anticipatory grief going through the end or medical issues is almost harder than the loss because you're up and down and unknown and you feel like,
mm,
"Isn't it?" And you mentioned you would look at them lying there and think, "Did he pass?" We've had that happen with one of our cats, and I'm just like, "This is a sense that I can't handle keeping," but, it's so hard. So I can imagine
it is
how
hard. Yeah. Yeah, and that dog, he'd lived a good life. He'd been through a thing or 2 as well.
they are our family. We make pets our family, and we would never not do what we're doing for them. But, we still go through that part of the grief process. So, for you with your most recent loss, how has it been having the other dog still? Is that a good support for you, or does that almost make it harder in
Yeah.
some ways?
No, it's in some ways, yes, because 'cause I'll have these moments where, because they did funny things together. And so I would, you know what I mean? Because it's kind of like a routine, right? And you kind of expect and you're like,
Yes.
"Oh, but he's gone." You know what I mean? And so I have a lot of those moments. But it's interesting how with both pairs of dogs, how when the first one died, the remaining dog changes. They
Mhm.
change. They're sad for a little while and they're looking for their friend. But then in our case, the survivor, I guess, for lack of a better term, becomes more affectionate. They
Mm.
become more cuddly. They were your ride or die before, but they were really like, you know what I mean? Because I think they don't have the competition anymore of
Hey.
we're not going to cause shenanigans now. We're just like,
Right.
here, pay attention to me.
That is so true because things adjust, but in some ways it's nice because you get to maybe even see a little bit different side of their personality too.
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting because I saw a side of Finnegan that I didn't really see. Maybe I noticed a little bit when we first adopted him, but he morphed into a different dog, and he was always sweet, but he does these really super cute kind of different things, and he's very snuggly. He wants to just get up there and snuggle, and so that's just nice.
Well, and one thing that I've actually learned too is that the animals also sense when we're going through things, right?
Yeah.
They can tell when we don't feel well or something's off. When I lost one of my first cats and I brought his remains home and I kind of sat it on the bed and I didn't expect to have this overwhelming emotion as I, took out and the paw print and my other cat came up and, like, rubbed on the box, and
Oh.
then that broke me even more, but it's like it's that
Mhm.
connection we have that is why we love them, but it's also so interesting when we see the response of the other pets.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a job that I just really made me cry. And
Had
when we had
those.
the first dog, yeah. So and that's where the dog actually I that my friend that had the dog, that was that job. And it just got
Mhm.
to to the point where there was a couple of weeks there where I cried every night when I got home. And so I was sitting there crying on like I don't even know what made me cry. I'm watching TV and I just start crying. My husband's at work. And that just had this spot behind the couch. It was like this little cubby for her, and I think that I must have started sniveling, making some sort of noise, and she came around, and because I'm allergic, I don't let the dogs lick me. And I pet them and I snuggle them, but no licking. And so she came up and it was the sweetest thing. And she kind of like looked around the couch and then she moved forward and then she gently put a paw on my leg because I was laying like this on the couch. And she put her nose up to my face and didn't touch, but came so close. And, it was just like, it still gets me to this day because it was like she was comforting me because I was just so miserable. And then she kind of just curled up next to me on the couch. And it was just like, gosh, I need to
Right.
leave this
Yeah,
job.
the way they can sense things, I mean, oftentimes I'll say, "I don't know how people exist without a pet." Like, how do you function? Because I need them in those ways. Like, I lay down to
Mhm.
watch TV and I wanna know you're right here and I can pet you, or I had a cat that would always just take one paw and put it on my shoulder. Like,
So
those are
sweet.
the little things that make it all why we do this and while they're family also, right? They're such
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
important part of all of our experiences, good and bad.
Mhm.
So for you as a writer, we haven't talked about that. You write fiction.
Uh-huh.
And can you talk a little bit about that? And how do you use animals in your writing? Do you like to add animal characters into your writing?
I do. And so here's the funny thing. The first book, I had a donkey that we went out to Oatman, and Oatman said it's classified as a village, which it has like 27 people or something live there. It's a former mining town that hippies had moved into in the 70s. It's kind of a touristy place, but the burros that they released that the miners used to use, they live in the hills there. And so they come into the town. And so my younger son and I went out there and all excited to see these. And there was some sort of incident. And so we only saw a handful of them. But when I came home, I had been writing this scene about, I write a historical Western. And so there's this character called Righty, and he's one of the gang members who's bad. Nobody likes him in this gang. But there's a story about him he hates this white burro that keeps coming and people feed him. And so he's going to ride this burro and he gets bucked off. And so I told a funny story that the other gang members were telling this story about this incident, and they're guffawing about it and laughing. And so that was the first animal that I wrote in. And in the second book, I have a temperamental horse that the hero rides, and he's just kind of a character in and of himself. And then there's this giant wolfhound mix that adopts the hero, and he's trying to tell him something. But
Mm.
between this dramatic dog and this temperamental horse, that's a little through line that went through, and I really entertained myself with that. I really like this character.
I love that. And I have a feeling those temperamental personality animals might have a little bit of some of your dogs in them.
Yeah, and it started with the dog that we have right now, still, Finnegan. He came to us not liking baths, like he's terrified of water. And I think it's
Mm.
from being in the county pickup, he was a stray, and then
Mhm.
the kennels get hosed out, and he just does
Right.
not like the hose. He does not like water. And so giving him a bath is really not fun for anybody.
Just, sometimes they're just like, no, I don't like it. You're not doing it.
Yeah, he really doesn't like it. He's gotten better, but it still requires two people to give him a bath. One person cannot do it on their own. And so I did write a scene where Jimmy, the hero, is like, "You smell, dog. You can bunk with me, but you can't do it until you get a bath." And so he takes him down to the river to give him a bath. And the one thing that I did take from that dog is that he gives me moon eyes, half moon eyes, when they look
Oh.
up at you. So that dog keeps giving Jimmy that look. And so that's from him.
Oh, yeah. I love that because one of the things I've learned about storytelling, however it is, podcasting, writing, that, a lot of it is us telling our story, is leaving a part of our legacy. So you've created these characters, including animals, that are a little piece of you and your animals and your experience. So I love how you can kind of reflect back on that and think of how the story you've written has come from your own little dog buddies too. So for you as someone who's recently lost a dog, if someone's listening and they are going through that kind of uncertain time or they've lost one, what is maybe one little thing you would say to them that's helped you through your grieving process?
Um, I think for me, when we had to put Duchess down, the first dog, it was very hard for me because even though she laid down and didn't get back up, I just felt like, what if? And I think that, like you said before, when you love your animals so much, they're such a part of your family. You just kind of have to trust yourself and your team that you made the right choice. And I think that the what ifs, you're going to do it, but it needs to stop. Like you need to allow yourself to give yourself a couple of moments of what ifs and however long that is, but then you have to stop punishing yourself. And you have to remember that dogs do not live as long as humans, and they're a gift that comes into your life, and the best thing that you can do for them and for you is to know that you did your best. Even if you made mistakes, you did your best and hold on to the sweet memories that you have of them, or even the aggravating ones that you can tell stories about because it's the web of life. And I think that I'm not saying don't dismiss it, but just don't keep punishing yourself because that I think it's harder to process the grief if you're punishing yourself.
And we all go through those times where we question and one of the things I always try to say to people, like even online when I'm commenting on a post where someone said, "Oh, I lost them," or we had to let them go. It's like, I know you're grieving right now, but you just have to realize you gave them an amazing life, whether it was a week or a year or 10 years, right? Sometimes
Mhm.
we need a little, like you've been just said, we needed just a little, it's okay. The grief is from the love. That's what I've learned with
Yeah.
all types of grief. So we have to feel lucky in having it, but we also have to realize that whatever time we had with them, like we got to give them everything in that moment. And it doesn't always make us feel better, but we can hold on to the knowledge that we gave them this great life. And in turn, they gave us all these amazing memories.
Yeah. And if you think about it, we always joke about, dogs forget, right? In a nanosecond, they forget that, you know what I mean? You've left and you've come back and it's just like, oh my God, you've been gone for days, right? Then the opposite must be true because the sort of good times that you had, even if you had a week could feel like years to a dog.
Right.
And that is a gift too, and I think we forget how much I do. I forget how much I have to offer. I think that we see it in other people. Like I would have no problem telling, look, you're offering so much and you're doing all these great things, but I don't give myself that grace. And I think that if there's any time that you could give yourself that kind of grace is when you lose a pet and you're in the deep and you did a great thing by giving this animal love, and food and shelter and care.
Yeah. It's something I had to learn. The first kitten I fostered passed away. And it was awful. It was horrible. I didn't ever expect that to happen. And once I kind of got over the shock of it, it was, my husband say we could bury him here and then he's here. And even though we only had him 5 days, we were still his family and he gets to stay
Yeah.
here. And it was hard and I would not wish that on anyone, but it was also good for me to realize, we have a cat that's 16. We've had him for a long time. Even the vet is shocked at how long he's sustained by getting
Yeah.
insulin, right? So it's good for me to hear that, to realize not only did we go the extra mile and continue to, like, it's worth it. He gets to sleep all day on the bed. Who cares? That's what we
Mhm.
can give him. And so I really appreciate you saying that. And I hope that it helps someone listening to this episode because sometimes we just need the little reminder that don't be so hard on yourself. You did a good thing no matter how long you got to have them with you. And
Yeah.
speaking of that, if you're looking for a new pet, we want to highlight one of your local animal rescues. Amy, you mentioned Arizona Animal Welfare League. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when we got Flanders from there, and they have this beautiful facility by the airport, actually, and they have a separate area for cats and kittens, and then they have the kennels outside for the dogs in the shaded area. They were great because we wanted a pair of dogs, and our kids were younger at the time, so they were young. And they let us bring out you know what I mean? Get to know a dog, put it back, get to
Right.
know multiple dogs, and then try to get to know two dogs together. And at the time, we didn't adopt two dogs together because we couldn't decide, but we did decide on Flanders. So we decided that we could bring him home. But the facility is nice. And I don't remember what it was like before that. We got our other animals from the Humane Society and then that friend, but they got like a big donation, and that's how they were able to build this
Mm.
facility. And the people who work there just really spend nice time with the animals and really get to know them. And the one guy that was working the animals, he was just like, he said goodbye to Flanders. I'm going to miss you, buddy. And I kind of was like, please.
That's amazing. A shout out to the Arizona Animal Welfare League. But I can say that I've had a little experience of that when I volunteered and worked for a little while in the shelter. is people don't realize a lot of times they're demonized, the shelter workers, but they are literally the heroes. Like, they live and breathe those animals. They get to know them, they bond with them, and they want them to find homes, but it is also hard because they've gotten to know them. They can tell you, like, this is a good fit if you're looking for this. And that's such
Mhm.
an important process for organizations like that to have.
Yeah, I have to say that's what I really liked about it because they would tell us, there was another dog and they were like, we don't think even on the card it looked good on paper, but then they said, this dog has like XYZ behavior and so we had to think about it and say, okay. And they were great. They were a great resource and a good source of information. So yeah.
That's great. Well, anybody in Arizona looking for a
Yeah.
pet will have to check them out. But I also think that's a good thing to highlight. If you're thinking about adopting an animal, find an organization you feel like is a good fit for you, that you feel like is going to give you the support you need. Now, not all shelters have time to give a lot of that extra support. Find the resources because there are lots of organizations out there wanting to either help you find the right animal or help you once you've adopted with training or
Yeah.
how best to take care of them. And that's why we want to highlight those organizations so that all the animals, find homes and are treated the way that they should be as
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
And of course, for you, Amy, and your books and all of your info, we will put those links in the show notes so people can learn more about you, follow you, and hopefully read your books.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here and sharing some of your pet stories with us. I know it's not always easy, especially when we've had a more recent loss, but I know someone's going to hear this and feel comforted or feel better about their own experience. So I really appreciate you coming and being so open with that.
Yeah, no, thank you. It was, like you said before, it's nice to talk about it with somebody. And so, yeah, it is very helpful. So thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Story of My Pet podcast. I appreciate you listening and supporting the podcast. And if you haven't already, wherever you are listening to this episode, make sure you hit follow or subscribe and leave us a rating or review. All of that helps the podcast grow and get to even more listeners and help us educate and advocate for animals in need around the world. If you haven't done so already, make sure to check out our brand new YouTube channel, Story of My Pet Podcast. Again, hit the subscribe button. Give us some likes and comments on our videos, and that will help the podcast grow on its new home on YouTube. Thank you so much for being here, and much love to you and your pet.